Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. We've got a very interesting interview today. We've got the host of Business of Sport podcast, Charlie Stebbings. He does it with his brother, I believe. Is it Harry that you
It
do
is
it
indeed.
with?
Yep. Luckily for you, not today. You just have me today.
Just you. But if people don't know this podcast, this is a really interesting. So, I mean, I will just say that I am interested in the football side of things. I know you do a lot of other sport things. You've had Formula One and lots of other sports in there, but I love the football side of things. You've done interviews, which we're going to talk about with Charlie Methven. You've done Michael Beale, obviously, two former Sunderland people. I listened to one you did with the CEO at Bradford City, which I thought was fascinating. So this is a really good channel if you like the sort of behind the scenes of football, that maybe the ugly and gritty stuff, it's fair to say.
I appreciate it. Yeah, no, you've done a very good job of it. The main reason for it, as we were just talking about, was the business side of sport is now so important and plays such a huge role in the industry alongside performance. But there are very few places where you can actually go and find anything out about it. So when we were setting up the show, there was much more about trying to speak in a long form conversation. Generally we do it between 50 minutes, probably to an hour and 10, with the executives, the athletes who are doing stuff now on an investment side, the people that are trying to buy clubs, but always trying to figure out, just how a lot of it works. It's not to skewer them. It's not to go and use their past experiences and try and create a kind of awkward atmosphere. You're trying to build some form of conversation around it where they want to talk about the jobs they do, and it is very interesting. So I'm really pleased you like it. The football stuff naturally does take up quite a few, but yeah, we probably need to be a little bit more focused because there's too many sports to to look at properly.
Yeah. Well, today we're going to be talking about football. It's fair
Lovely.
to say.
Easy.
So just to run down roughly, we're going to talk about the state of football as a business generally, talking obviously about Sunderland. I also want to touch on your interviews with Charlie Methven and Michael Beale as well. But I think a good place to start is, why do you think people are beginning to get obsessed with the behind the scenes of sport? And I think for me, I've noticed, for example, the growth of documentaries, Sunderland Till I Die being one of them, Wrexham being another one. Sunderland actually had one in the 90s called Premier Passions. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but that was a behind the scenes thing. But I think there's always sort of been an interest. But now with companies like The Athletic, who do a lot of things like this, there is a lot of focus on the behind the scenes, and Kieran Maguire doing The Price of Football. People are more interested now, or not maybe more, but as interested in the behind the scenes and what's happening with PSR and all that sort of stuff. But why do you think that actually is?
Really simply because I think it impacts performance now more than it has done ever before. And anything that impacts what goes on the pitch is going to be of interest to a fan. So, gone are the times where, you can pretty much free spend and run your club however you want it. And we all know, some clubs benefited massively from that, but a lot just kind of ran relatively traditionally. And now you have a system which has a load of regulations. It has a load of do's and don'ts, and whether they work or not is another conversation. But the numbers around the game are reported on far more because money and financial reporting, I think, is just coming into the actual game more. So, the transfer fees, they've always been a thing. I mean, now they are obviously huge. The wages always been a thing. They're only going up. And, the definition of players by their salaries in papers, it was always, for me, that was always the engagement I really had with a business of football type thing. But there's so much behind that. And, these guys they're top assets for major businesses, major organizations. In any industry, you're going to get paid well for it. The problem really, I think, for a lot of fans is it's really understanding how their clubs can operate within the rules and regulations that they have. And the frustrations that come with that often are targeted towards those running the business side, because we all know, and I'm a fan myself, right? So I want my club to spend money. I want them to invest in things. I want them to buy good players. I want to have a nice stadium to go to when I'm at the ground. The more I get interested in that, the more I want to figure out why can I not spend money if I'm Aston Villa this year? What's actually happened? Because we were on a flying high, doing amazingly well, and now suddenly it just seems like a lot of that excitement and buzz around the club has gone, and we know that financials have been a problem. Same if you're Newcastle, you got the richest owners ever, and you're having to run pretty tight budgets. So it becomes more and more influential. And the more these things continue to grow and develop, and they will only become more of a topic, because we now have the independent football regulator coming in. You mentioned that you like, football league and stuff that goes on down there. That's going to play a massive part in it. What clubs can spend, distribution of money from the Premier League to the lower leagues. Try and maintain as much as we can in the pyramid, which obviously is the pride of this country's football system, right? It's the amazing number of clubs and communities that they support. But money sits at the heart of it. And also, another side to it, I just think, is media, right? Look at media now as you and I having a chat on this channel, whether 20 years ago, if we're looking at why stuff wasn't talked about as much, you had core central platforms, big publishers, newspapers, and a few like Match Magazine or, whatever, if you ever got any of those things. So now everyone who has a phone or, you have a recording set up, and you can create content about this. So our opportunity to speak more about things just plays a massive part, I think, in us pulling the industry apart a little more. And it's not just about results.
What do you make of, we talked a little bit about PSR, I suppose, there, we talked regulations. What do you make of regulations? Because for me, and I am not a business person, so I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I am a business person. I am not. But it feels counterintuitive to say that the Premier League is this massive thing, but they are limiting the ability of people to invest in it. And I understand the reasons why. We saw what happened with Portsmouth. We've seen that clubs can spend too much, and what happens if the owner gets bored and goes, I'm just going to pull the plug. So I get that why it's in there, but it seems ridiculous that there's an industry that's saying, whoa, let's pump the brakes. We don't want you to spend this much money. And I get it from the other side, because then if you want to run your club sustainably, you can't do it. If you're, say, Brentford, who generally are profitable, how difficult would it be for them to be competitive if Newcastle and Aston Villa are able to spend whatever they want, and all the top teams are able to spend what they want, and a gulf would build, which we sort of saw with the top four in the sort of 2000s before these regulations came in. So it's a bit of a, I don't know, it's really difficult to get your head around what's actually the right thing to do, but it does feel very anti what we are as a people, where we want to invest in things, to say, do you know what, let's just slow down investing. But I don't know where you sit on all this.
It's such a hard one. It's such a hard one, because what football clubs have proved very well for a very long time is that they can't regulate themselves, right? And that is a bigger issue in itself. But if you can't, and you've got a system that relies on these things being stable, they're very weird businesses, aren't they? Because they're private assets, but they're community assets. They have an owner, but they're owned by the fans. And when you have the Berries, the Southend's, the Sheffield Wednesday type thing you're going through now, luckily not as bad yet, but it needs a solution. When you have these financial challenges around these clubs, the knock-on effect of something going wrong. And you mentioned the documentaries. I mean, I love Sunderland Till I Die. That was my favorite, and I still say now it's my favorite ever sports documentary, because I loved seeing what the club meant to the fans. And even you never really got to see that before. So if that's a key part of it, can you risk the longevity of those clubs and the impact that not having Sunderland would have to the people of Sunderland? Can you risk that? It's tough. So one side, you want this capitalist environment where, as you said, investment coming in is great and we need to do that. On the other side, you're going, actually, it needs to be a pretty well monitored, restricted system, because if it goes too far one way or the other, we risk the integrity of not just the club, but then obviously the whole league and the system that it sits in. Is PSR the right one? Is it, that's an interesting discussion point. It's quite weird, isn't it? It seems to me, you can look at it as the old political piece of the countries that, go through an industrial revolution and kind of go and have crazy times with oil and coal and all of this and build up their economies and become what you'd class as a first world country, and then suddenly the minute anyone else tries to do it and recognizes that they want to grow, you go and stick a load of regulations in place and go, no, we've only got to do green now because the world's in real trouble, meaning that obviously the people that benefited in the start are here. The rest of the system now has to sit here and find a different way to do it. And if you're looking at that in football, PSR protects the big clubs to the extent that it relies on clubs making a lot of money. So the biggest clubs are going to make the most money, therefore they're going to be able to spend more. Now, is that fair? Not really. But at what point do you try and integrate things like, the people talk about salary caps to try and do it. Well, that's anti many of the things we believe in, obviously. Again, anti-opportunity. I know the PFA are hugely against it, but you can be creative around that type of thing. To me, if you have a system where you can only spend 70%, let's say, of your revenue on playing budget, that is basically a salary cap that has been placed on the league. It's just not called that, because they can't spend more than 6 million a year on it if their revenues are nearly 10. So there's and again, it comes back to the regulator, coming in and doing this. I think the regulations will change a lot. UEFA obviously have very different regulations. And if you look at things like Chelsea, where they'll go and sell their own assets to themselves and find loopholes and run rings around the Premier League's legal and financial structures, the UEFA don't accept that, which is why Chelsea have been hammered with a massive set of fines because of the losses that they actually have in their books versus the ones that the Premier League accept, because they say you can't sell your hotel to yourself, which is weird, obviously. So yeah, to be honest, I find it hard to keep track of. There's so many different things and acronyms and everything. How many football fans do you reckon would have known what amortization was a few years ago?
None.
Right now it's a football buzzword. But with that comes risk as well. So it's an interesting one for fans. I mean, you guys have I don't know. I'd say a pretty like good, solid financial structure around the club at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I want to talk about that. Sunderland. If you go back to Ellis Shaw, we were a team that was spending recklessly, wasting money on things on and off the field. We then fall into League One, so we then endure going from being the team that's trying to punch up to everyone. We are then the team to be punched at when we're in League One, and then the way the club's then got itself in the Premier League, they've done it in a really interesting way as well, which we are going to talk about. But the one thing I noticed when Sunderland fell into League One is that the teams in League One were trying their best to make Sunderland, the fact Sunderland had 30,000 people going to their games and 25,000 season tickets, they were trying to stop Sunderland being able to sort of compete with, to compete at that level. Sunderland should have had the best resources in that league. When COVID happened, they put in this salary cap. I think it was like a stupid number where you could only spend a certain amount in the COVID time. And why should Sunderland and Accrington Stanley spend the same amount of money? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So I've sort of seen it from both ends. I've seen why the regulations need to be there, because I've seen Sunderland fall down the leagues because of regulations. And we're going to talk about Charlie Methven, but obviously he's a big part of that when we were in League One. And then I've seen us come back up. We're in the Premier League now, and we've had the benefit of PSR and all that sort of stuff. But Sunderland, I think, are interesting because it's been up and down the pyramid probably more than any other club. Maybe Luton are probably the only other team that's done that. And I think that gives me a bit of a warped perspective for me from PSR, because I sort of see the need for it because I saw what happened to Sunderland, and I'm like, well, that could happen to a team in the Premier League if they are not careful about how they spend. Look at Leicester. They are maybe an example right now of a team that have overspent, fell down. It wouldn't shock you in the next few years if Leicester actually did maybe go into League One. Sheffield United struggling at the bottom of the Championship right now. So I can kind of see the need for the regulations, but I don't know, from a Sunderland perspective.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is that I think the costs so far outstrip the money coming into football that, all of these businesses now just have a really, really difficult challenge on their hands. I mean, it's so easy to criticize people, right? But if you're trading in a market where the premium assets are even at League One level now going to 10 to 15 million, if you look at what Jay Stansfield was, that just completely warps and distorts the whole system. And these teams want to win. Their owners want to win. And so are they going to take a bit of a risk and maybe overextend themselves to achieve some of that? Absolutely, they will. And you're going to hope that down the line you don't come into the types of trouble that we've mentioned with some of the clubs. But hope's a horrible thing to build a financial strategy on. And you look at the value of going from League One to the Championship and the money that brings, let alone what the Championship to the Premier League does. That's what all of these chase. I mean, it's interesting. Some of the clubs that we've spoken to in League One, it seems a really basic question, but you genuinely, when you ask, like, what's your ambition? Like, what do you want this club to be? I find the answers very interesting, because while the assumption is always, obviously we want to climb up, we want to reach the Premier League, the heights of that are amazing. Quite a few of them aren't. They've got fan bases that love being in and around, let's say, middle of League One, competitive football every week, good players coming through the door. They're nice businesses. They get everything they want out of their football club as a fan, which, is all you can ask for. And playing at that level and competing there is perfect for them. And if they were to push any further, it could corrupt the whole integrity of the business that they've built and the club that they've built around it. They'd lose some of that identity. And so, just figuring out how to position that club for success, how to look at where you really want to be, is always interesting. And these teams are, as we said, again, are just amazing assets, right? So anything that risks that and then compromises it, you need to have some protections. But owners are and will forever be unpredictable, and so you're having to work with some very, very strange people and situations in some of this. I mean, interesting you said it around Sunderland and their experience in League One. I mean, it's what you've got a bigger club than a bigger ground than most of the Premier League teams. And in some cases, you sit in League One and look at the revenues you can generate and the competition. Yeah, I mean, it's not equal, but football isn't equal. So when you have things that mean you can spend the same amount of money as an Accrington, as you said, it's quite an interesting model to live with.
Yeah. Let's talk about Sunderland now, though. I think the most interesting thing with Sunderland is probably the way that they've got to the Premier League, because they haven't really spent a lot of money to do it. Normally, when you see teams come up, look, if you look at, say, Ipswich, for example, they came out of League One losing money. They got into the Premier League losing money. I'm not saying they spent lots, and I'm not taking anything away from what they did. It was fantastic. But Sunderland have lost bits of money, but they probably have come into the Premier League on an even keel. They sold big players every summer. They didn't invest masses of money into the squad. Generally, it was we sell to buy. And that isn't not the norm for teams getting into the Premier League. And then when Sunderland have gotten the Premier League, they've then had a spending bonanza and spent 180 million and revamped the team. But what do you make of the way that Sunderland have actually got to the Premier League? And do you think anyone will be able to mimic those sort of circumstances? Because it's so difficult to just go, do you know what, we're Preston North End, we're going to copy what Sunderland did, because Sunderland were able to do it from sort of ground zero of we're in League One, we can actually afford to scrap it all and start again.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, Sunderland is a massive club, right? So just if you're looking at, let's say you're a player and you're looking at these options, and if you're the top of that level, if you're the top of the League One category of players, even top caliber championship, and you've got a number of options to go and play at various places, Sunderland's going to be high on your list. If maybe Wrexham, obviously, of the recent years, and Birmingham for the work that's going on there, but for your fandom, for your infrastructure, for the history, playing for Sunderland is massive. So having that in your back pocket, right? And it's only a part of it, but having that in your back pocket is very helpful. And I think that's played a huge part in, just being able to have confidence in a strategy, knowing that we're selling something that is really good here to start with. Look, something we neglected in talking about wider football, spending money doesn't guarantee results, right? Just because you have a big budget doesn't mean you're going to win. And so much of football now is about sourcing that right talent and having a strategy that you can actually stick to and try and build on. And that's when, when I look at you guys, I think you've built a system more than a squad, right? You built a way of doing things. And you stick to it. There's a consistency in it. It's the same in how you run the club, right? From the owner into the directors and who has the responsibility for football. And, you have a manager that buys into it. So if you have all of that together and working well, you get to you have a good chance of getting to the Premier League. You've done it. And as you said, you've gone from League One to the Prem in not much time in football terms, while being very responsible in business and getting some players that I think, you'll be able to tell me far more, but the fans really enjoy. They can get behind that team. They like the identity. You don't have that kind of prima donna environment with a lot of the players. And what I liked, actually, I love the fact you spent money this summer. In the last few years, and it's probably the biggest concern for the Premier League has been the gap and the fact that 3 teams getting relegated in 2 years in a row who have gone up, going straight back down. If you actually look at it, quite a lot of those teams, they weren't spending as recklessly maybe as some of the clubs in the years before, because they just realized that the likelihood of them going down, then having to keep that cost on the books and balance that and that type of squad in the Championship was far more significant. You coming in here and dropping, what was it, 140, 50, 60 million I mean, that's a no. We're going for this. Like, we've worked really hard to get there. We built a system. Now we're going to properly invest in the ways that we know we need to. But you still didn't. I don't get the feeling that you just threw money for the sake of it. I mean,
No.
you look at the players you brought in. You've got some really, really good, exciting young talent. That fits the system.
I mean, you look at a lot of the players they've bought. Players like Robin Roofs, for example, who's just every week on Match of the Day being the best keeper, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of the players they've bought, because of the age profiles, Robin Roofs probably sells for triple what you paid for him, even if Sunderland get relegated. And that's what they did in the Championship. They bought players who they've thought the chances are their value is going to go up this season because we believe in them. And they've done a really good job of getting like the right personalities as well.
But you also get Granit Xhaka, right?
Yeah,
which,
but that's crazy.
Is on the other side. Okay, interesting. Like, what's the feeling around that signing?
I just don't understand why he plays for Sunderland. It's like, that's why. And I don't mean that in like I just mean when we were linked, the feeling in the fan base was, is this just agent talk? Is this him fishing for a new deal? And then it got a little bit more serious. And then we're here like, oh no, then Ten Hag came out and was like, no, we're not selling him. And then the Sunderland owner's like, no, what do you want? We will write a check, whatever fee you want, and buy a quoted 20 million euros. And they're like, yeah, we'll pay it. And he's bought into it. But that's the thing. He set the standard, which I was just about to talk about personalities of the players that they've brought in. And Xhaka has set the standard for all the players. He's bought into everything at the club. He's singing the anthem at full time and stuff. Things that make you as fans feel connected. But also, I think it connects the other players where they think, oh, so our captain thinks it's all right to sing along with the fans. Right, we'll do that. And it's brought together. And it's all personality with Sunderland. I think they've done that a lot since this ownership group has been in. They've always brought in the right types of players. And
that's the best thing about that, right? What that said a lot more than just signing of Granit Xhaka about the club. That showed an ownership that also understands what needs to happen when you come into a Premier League and have a strategy that is geared more towards young players and future value trading, right? That you still need. It's what Chelsea don't do. They have 25 and over. You're on the heap. Like, we will only sign young people. Now that's all fine, but you have to have experience in those teams. You have to have people that have been around a little bit, that if it's not all going well, understand how to get stuck in. They understand the values of the culture and throwing yourself into something beyond the pitch. And without that, it's very, very hard to operate. And so if you're bringing all these young players in, you need something that really like brings them together. And having someone like him,
that's why Xhaka is so good, because they've thought, right, it's 17 million. He's actually invested as well in the club. I mean, he's talked about a 10-year plan. So they've clearly sold Xhaka on, you are going to become part of the infrastructure at the club. Whether, I don't know if he wants to be a coach, a director, whatever it is. But it's also the investment of Xhaka will bring on the young players. Chris Rigg, for example, who's a teenager, who's played a lot of games for Sunderland. He is learning next to Granit Xhaka. Dan Neil, who's potentially Granit Xhaka's success, obviously was the captain last season, who's played a lot for Sunderland, but he is learning from Granit Xhaka. And I think it's the investment in the mentality that a player like him brings. He's like Switzerland's record appearance holder. He's won titles, competed at the top level, obviously, for probably about 12 years. Yep. That, for me, is like a smart investment, even though it's a player with no resale value.
Yep, because you're not looking at that as an investment to make money at the end of a contract. You're looking at the value he's going to bring you now, and that's the other side of it. That value doesn't have to just exist in selling a player. If he keeps you in the Premier League, if he helps keep you in the Premier League, well, that 20 million's more than paid off. That 17 million's more than paid off.
Yeah,
right? It's not about future value at the end of his contract. And so to be able to do that, he'll also be adding value, as you said, to the players around him. So if he can make another player more valuable because they get 2 years worth of playing time next to someone that is a great influence and role model in their career, then again, that's worth the money. So the positive part for you there is, I'd look at that and say that it's really good to guess, and I think you can guess that the ownership understands that, and that's why they're making these types of moves. Like, that's massively positive. A lot of clubs would love that.
I want to talk a little bit about what Sunderland have done off the pitch, because I think we're going to talk about Charlie Methven as well in a minute, but I think one of the things that ownership group got horribly wrong is they didn't invest in infrastructure. If anything, they took away infrastructure from the club. And I think that this infrastructure have done, they've invested significantly in the stadium. They've, like, even things like colouring it. It used to be grey in the concourses, now it's red. There's murals. They fixed the floodlights that didn't work. The speakers were terrible in the stadium. They've also moved us from having templated Adidas kits and Nike kits, which we'd had in years past. We've now got bespoke Hummel kits. Hummel used to be a provider for us, years ago, and people always liked them. They've done so much to instill like pride, and I think that affects things on the pitch more than what people understand. I think people, certainly for me, I mean, I've been in the inner workings of Sunderland when they're in League One. There was no pride of place because everything was run down, and now everything isn't. And I think that actually affects things on the pitch more than what other people or anyone would actually think.
The products of your environment, right? If you play in a club that looks like it cares about itself and has facilities that match the ambition, and then you're more likely to succeed in it.
Do you think clubs overlook that though?
Yeah, massively. Yeah,
focus too much on field.
Yeah, and again, we understand why, right? A penny spent away from the pitch it's a massive risk. And again, speak to some of the CEOs that we do. I can't remember which one, but they were talking about the fight that they had to invest in the lights for the stadium, and it had to happen, and it needed to, and it made obviously the facility way better. But it was about 400 grand, and if you're playing in League One, that's a good player that you can bring in on that money, and the fans will always want that player as well as a better stadium. So at some point you need to make a decision on what you do, and if it's not on the pitch, it's often quite hard to justify. So it's a really fine line to tread. The value of great stadiums, great facilities. I mean, I don't know if you've been. I haven't been to Everton's one. I'm sure it's amazing, but if you come down to London and you go to Spurs Stadium, I mean, it's insane. Rubbish club, obviously, so that's good. But its infrastructure is incredible, and what they've done there, and the experience that they give all the fans and the away fans as well. Have a pretty great setup in there. The stadium being multi-purpose, means that it's kind of looked at in a very different way. Fulham have just done it with the stand that they've put on the river and made it, a huge like entertainment hub as well. Fans get a huge amount of that, especially if they live in the local area. They're much more engaged in their football club. Therefore, that's positive association. At least, that's additional value for that club. That kind of stuff. It's huge, and now we all want good experiences. So the better the experience you can get in there. And also you want to capture that food and beverage money from the fans. If you're businesses, they want people to spend more in their stadiums. They need to make more money now, as we've just discussed. So, give a nice environment to do that. When you have, red and white murals on the walls rather than grey concourse, you want to spend a bit more time in there. Shock. And then obviously it can be great recruitment tools. Look at it from the performance side. Top level training facility. A lot of players will want to go and because that's where you spend most of your time. A lot of players will want to go and spend their time there against a club that is still kind of playing in a few cabins and waterlogged pitches. No thanks. It's not.
Yeah.
Not for me. So it obviously has massive value, but it is genuine investment. I mean, look at Man U. Their biggest trouble, really. Yes, obviously they've got a huge number on the pitch, but off the pitch, with the infrastructure is a massive issue. And anyone that bought into that club or looks at investing has to appreciate that at some stage someone's going to have to stump up between 1.5 to 2 billion to go and develop Old Trafford. That's a huge ask and task. So it throws different dynamics in, but I completely agree with you. I mean, it's a massive part of the game, and certainly something that clubs need to be better on the whole.
Yeah, I think that infrastructure it sounds like a boring topic, but I just can tell when you go to Sunderland that it now looks like a club that's looked after, and I think it makes a massive amount of difference.
The fans talk about it. Yeah, like when if you're on the concourse, the fans talk about it. Like
100%. Yeah, massive. And I think that's so interesting because I think a lot of people, when we were in League One, and obviously every penny counts a bit more when you're in League One than what it does when you're in the Premier League. The fact is if somebody said, right, okay, we need to spend £1 million doing the speakers and painting the concourses, people were like, no, give us a Charlie Wyke, who we bought when we were in League One, who can score 30 goals in a season. Whereas when you're in the Premier League and you do have that breathing space, it's different, isn't it? You can then go, okay, we can actually begin to invest. But they started doing it earlier, to be fair.
Yeah.
They started doing it in the Championship, but I think it's
Well,
interesting.
it's the iconic Sunderland till I die scene, isn't it? With Charlie on his DJ deck trying to pump up the pump up the atmosphere.
Let's talk about Charlie Methven then, because you did an interview with him, and I think judging by the comments, and I also watched it, and some of it fine, some of it I thought he had quite a what's the word, sugar-coated view maybe, and he's not very well liked in Sunderland. He's seen as quite a controversial figure. What did you make of his reflections of his time at Sunderland?
It's always really hard, isn't it, when you speak to people about reflections, because you're always looking at it through the lens, as you've just highlighted, of how they view something like that. So it was interesting. What I can do is I can look at, if I look at it as a reflection of what we did in the run up to doing that, having that conversation, and where I was really looking to see what the feeling was, and obviously the work that he had done being relatively public in some cases through the show. There were massive financial issues, right? Let's not hide away from it fundamentally. And the beginning of that second season, and that first 15 minutes of the first episode of season 2 for Sunderland Till I Die it was amazing. You've seen it going like, this is the interest you're paying on debt. That's literally just that number is massive. It was like 7 million or something, wasn't it? I mean, everyone waiting for this owner funding. Are you really doing the most you can to try and maximize your job, your involvement in this club? We need to shift the thinking. The financial piece here is completely unsustainable. And then we get into the conversation you and I had at the start, which is, how deep's that hole, and how big a hole can you dig yourself? We know it's pretty big. So his reflections on where the club was and the finances of the club, without obviously being in there, I think that was a massive issue. And I like the way he approached it from the outside. Again, from everything I've seen, I don't want to get loads of hate on your channel, so I'll be careful. But I thought his approach to that was good. The bit that I will fully kind of appreciate, I'd imagine, is that running a club is more than just your ability to execute. It's, as you talked about, how you engage both with the staff and the fans. It's about your approach and style, right? Just very simply to it. It's about understanding the community. It's about the time spent in the area. Lots of these things will play into that. And that's the side. I mean, it's interesting from you as a fan, the fan base, because if I say I've sat here and had a good experience, and I do, and I like Charlie a lot. I think he's very good, and he was popular from his time at Charlton. Different environment. Why? Interesting, right? We get a question to say why was that working and Sunderland didn't, let's say. But he did a good thing for the club and the business of it. And if you look at where it was when he took over versus where it was when he left, as a business, right? Just from that side of it, there was a lot of good work that went into it, and will have laid some of the early foundations for good ownership to come in and be able to build on it, because they would have had to do something very similar and probably waste a good few years trying to clean up the challenges that were already there. I mean, you worked underneath him. He was your boss. You know his style. It's direct, right? It doesn't suffer fools, and it's certainly. If you're of a certain type of person, a tough one to get familiar with, to be able to work with, I'd imagine. And that, as I said, is as important as his ability to deliver. So I find it interesting. I find it really interesting, the response on that, and seeing it. And that was when we first spoke, right? It was off the back of it. And being as open and honest as you were at the time about the feelings towards him and that, and I never know, and you'll be able to tell me, I mean, how much of that was directly Charlie, how much of that was the broader state of the club at the time, and just some of the negativity that existed. That's the side that always interests me. Is someone just a face for it, or is it actually the individual and what they're doing that is unpopular?
I think if I was to point at a few of the issues, is one, I mean, I did his first big interview when he came to the club. So literally on the day they did the press conference, they came afterwards and they did an interview with, I was at Roker Report at the time, and they came in with quite big talk. I mean, one of the big things Charlie said was they want to follow a Dortmund model. That was the word he used. I don't know what a Dortmund model necessarily entails back 8 years ago, but that was one of the things that he said. And that ownership group had a lot of goodwill from some of the early things they did. They changed all the seats, as you can see behind us, they changed all the seats. so they weren't pink. They did a lot of early sort of positive things, but then I think as time went on, it became clear that actually the things like we're going to follow a Dortmund model. So that means we're going to invest in the academy and we're going to, promote from within. Very clearly, it became obvious when they were selling academy players to teams that they weren't doing that. And I think a lot of people sort of felt like they were basically lied to. I mean, there was other things around the buying of the club. It looks like they bought the club using parachute payments, I believe. So they used the club's own money to buy the club. I'm no accountant, so I'm not going to pretend that I know all that. But I think there was a lot of things that happened in the sort of first 6 months when everyone liked them and people were getting selfies with them and he was seen with his pint and it was all happy days. It became quite clear that actually there were issues that when he said they were going to follow, say, a Dortmund model and focus on academy football, it became quite obvious that that wasn't necessarily going to be the case.
It's tough, isn't it? It's a fine balance between the level of communication you have with fans and saying things that come back to bite you. I mean, I was thinking about that the other day because I heard the Jim Ratcliffe interview that he did recently. And, he pretty much said Ruben Amorim's a 3-year coach and he's going to get 3 years. Now, look, on some side, we criticize people for not giving managers time. And I like that in theory. It's a good thing. Invest in someone, stick with them, see if it works. But we all know this game, right? And if it gets so bad that fans genuinely start protesting, if they make the Old Trafford environment basically unplayable for a lot of the players, and most importantly, if that dissatisfaction comes back on the board, manager's gone. We all know it. And then you're left there holding something going, oh, but I thought you said 3 years. What changed? He was already not doing well when you said that. So when you want to be open and honest, and obviously I'm an advocate for that. I run a show that is all about these individuals being open and honest, but you do still have to think about how you talk about something like that. If you're talking about the model, the Dortmund model, what does that actually mean? Other than eventually signing a Bellingham, you want,
which we did do.
Yeah, exactly. You probably want to really understand what that is, what that looks like. You need to go on that journey as a fan with the ownership. You need to be holding them to account for that. If that's how they're going to position it, you then want to see the results of that. And if it's not that, then there has to be communication again, right? And to me, that's why I see it with fans. Fans generally, even if they don't like something, if it's communicated to them and they're told why and they're brought on that journey, then it takes a lot of the initial sting out of it. They may not like it, but I understand maybe it has to happen. It's when clubs do things without having some form of communication and clarity as to why they're operating like it, and fans find out from whatever form of social media they're scrolling through. And they're like, well, that's completely different to what we thought was happening in this club. And that obviously stokes a negativity that is very hard to come back from. So, yeah, it's a difficult one. It is a difficult one. But I find, it's really interesting to see it. It's really interesting to see, that feeling towards Charlie definitely, has good feelings towards Sunderland. And whether people want to hear that or not, he was very he loved his time at the club. Doing it, I think, was a major challenge and something of great pride to kind of work in. And it comes back to the history and the quality of the club as just an asset and a business. It's an iconic team in this country. So anyone's very lucky to have the opportunity to do that. Being relatable and open to the fans is probably the most important thing. At least that's what I got from watching all the documentaries anyway, before they were involved in it. The power of that is incredible.
When I was within the club, my view on Charlie was that when he was there, he was really good at getting things going. But there was a mentality that I think was created within the club when he was there. And this is true. This isn't necessarily just a Charlie Methven point, but when he wasn't there, which I would say was at least 50% of the time, it felt like nothing was able to get done. And I think what that taught me as somebody that worked there was, if you are going to be involved in a business like football, you have to be actively involved, i.e. you have to move to the area and fully embrace it and not have... I'm not saying you can't have outside interests, of course. If you're a rich person, you've got businesses, yes. But my view on it is that Charlie was trying to fit Sunderland into his life rather than Sunderland being his life, and I think that is another thing that really hurt him when he was at Sunderland, was the fact that I don't think he was necessarily 100. I don't say he obviously was committed. I'm not saying he was like not.
No, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. I think it's a hugely important part of
when he was at Charlton, though. He lives in
right?
London, doesn't he? So probably easier for him to get more involved.
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't know what his situation was going when he went there and what he was doing. But I mean, you obviously were working with him, so you see the value of that. I mean, we talk a lot to the chief execs about how important being on the ground is, right? Whether it's some of the Premier League owners being there and kind of overbearing, or whether it's the lower league ones who literally, are in the stadium every day because some of the offices are in the stadium and that's where everyone's working out of. And look, generally, whether it's football, whether it's anything, being present in a job is really important. Right, and especially if you're running if we can call it a turnaround project, or changing an environment, and you're leading that, then it's much easier to do that if you're there. It's harder because people can't buy into everything that you're doing if you're not. So, a lot of that's then on the trust and development of the individuals that you've got in place to actually go and execute on your plan. And I have no idea what was behind the scenes at the time, but they're probably still, and again, I think I remember watching this, they're still pretty set in their ways from previous ownerships. There's maybe a hangover of how the previous ownership operated, and that was obviously a system that everyone had worked within. So you need to change some of that. You need to be present to do that effectively. And very few football clubs now, I think, if you are, well, certainly if you're a CEO, I mean, I've spoken to ones where their owners want them in there 7 days a week for pretty much every waking hour of the day, let alone kind of having a couple of days a week. So certainly now something that clubs, from what I've seen, are far more demanding of, because I agree, it's very, very hard to deliver something if you're not there and present and translating what it is that you're trying to do to the people around you to actually make it successful. So yeah.
I would agree with that. One other thing I want to talk about Charlie Methven, which is something, again, we talked about the importance of what Sunderland have done off the pitch. And one of the things that irritated me when that ownership group came in, I mean, it's not just him, it's Stuart Donald as well, and that whole group, was that they changed things that I felt should not be changed, i.e. the walkout music, the things like that fans are like. I mean, we've seen that on the documentary.
Yeah.
But for me, I'm like, well, you wouldn't walk into Liverpool. I'm not saying it's comparable, but change You'll Never Walk Alone. Or, I mean, then again, it's different. Obviously, You'll Never Walk Alone is a long-term football anthem. But as a fan who's been going to the stadium, I'd never been to Roker Park just because of my age. There were things that they were changing that I was like, well, you don't have a right to change what music we play when we win a game of football. They started playing Sweet Caroline. It's like, that means nothing to me as a fan. Like, I've got no interest. Like, it makes no difference. And that was something.
Did they ever run fan forums? Did they ever run fan forums? Did they ever do open conversations?
Then, no. Back then there was. Well, I mean, I used to talk to Charlie on the podcast I had and say to him, why are you changing this music? And he was like, well, we need to refresh and all that sort of stuff. But I think wider in terms of football, how important do you think it is that when ownership groups come in, that they respect? I understand sometimes you have to change things to freshen up, but there has to be a respect of traditions. And I think that's maybe another thing that had rubbed people up the wrong way, was that scene on Netflix where they were slating the Dance of the Night song, which had been playing for years, the Apprentice theme music that had been in there for years. And it's like, well, no, we've grown up with that. We love that. Why would you change that? What value do you think that has? And is that just a silly own goal maybe somebody could make?
It's an easy way for people to criticize you, isn't it? And it's an easy way for people to basically say that you're disconnected. So if you're going to do any of that stuff, again, put the work in to include the fans in some of the decisions you're making and communicate it as best as you can. And, if there's a really good reason to do it, at the end of the day, you're going to do it. So why not make sure that you're as protected as possible? You're shielded from the inevitable critique that will come from some. But if there's a good reason, get on board with it, because it's actually going to change how we can market ourselves, brand ourselves, in this instance, create that environment that is so unique up here because of the 40-odd thousand that we can get in the stadium. We've had I've been to Stamford Bridge a couple of times recently, and they've now started playing music after goals, and everyone's like talking about it. I didn't even notice it. Honestly, I didn't. I was, so yeah. Some people are going mad about it. If I think about it, it's a bit weird. Like, you don't need it. I know everyone will be like, "Oh, atmosphere is rubbish," and quite often it is. But the noise is good anyway. When a goal's scored, I don't think it has to have
it was
that.
good at the weekend when the
That
scored
was
against
amazing.
Liverpool.
That was amazing. That was the best atmosphere I'd heard there in a long time. Liverpool fans actually were quite quiet for 90 minutes, which was unusual. But something like that, does it matter? Yeah, people love to obsess over these details, and the ones that have strong connections and heritage and like things done a certain way will always pick up on it, and others won't really care. So you're always treading that line. But again, if you're just looking at what it actually means, right? It means a lot to some people. Then it needs a lot of effort and work put into, if you're going to change it, put into that communication, because otherwise, as you say, it's an own goal, and it's a stress that you don't need on your plate, I'm sure. When you're trying to actually run a club, so those things, play again a massive. It's another part of that jigsaw of how do you build the best relationships and communicate with the only people that really matter in this, in football, which is the fans. It's the only thing that matters.
It's interesting. I've been watching the Salford. I don't know if you watch Salford's YouTube channel, but they've got a really good sort of. It's like a running documentary. So it's instead of it being like, say, the Welcome to Wrexham, where it's filmed and then 6 months later you see it. They literally are putting on their YouTube channel.
Yeah.
The game at the weekend, they're putting it on the Monday, but they had a fan forum with Gary Neville, and they want to change the colours back to the orange and black, which is what they played in before they bought the club. And it's very interesting because he was basically saying when they changed to red, they just did it. And now they're like, that was the wrong thing to do. We should have consulted. And now they're saying, right, we want to change back. So we're not the same as Man United.
Interesting.
But it's actually worth watching. I'm certainly from your
take a look at that.
Watching because they go behind. But anyway, let's finish off talking about Michael Beale, because he is somebody again who's been at Sunderland. He had loads of positive things to say about Sunderland, which was probably surprising because of how badly it ended for him.
Yeah.
What I think is most interesting about Michael Beale is that the Sunderland fan base, almost immediately from when his name was linked, was not taken by Michael Beale. They had, as a fan base, we had decided that, I mean, I didn't because I always give everyone a chance, but they decided that they did not want this manager to come in. It wasn't the right fit, and it was a ludicrous decision to make. And the club
why was that?
I think that it stems for two reasons. I think one, the way he left QPR. I don't think people like that at all. He signed that new contract and then he left QPR to go to Rangers. And two, I think that people maybe don't realise that Rangers maybe are a little bit in our world.
Yeah.
Because, we are closer to Scotland. I think a lot of people up here, I mean, for example, my dad is a Rangers fan. A lot of people up here have connections to the old firm and do have connections with the Scottish teams. And people looked at that and thought, this doesn't really make any sense. I also think people looked at him as a little bit of a David Brent character, maybe the way that he spoke, and didn't like that. I thought it was very interesting how volatile it was, though, around him, because I was like, you know what, I don't think it's the right appointment, but I'm certainly not like gonna not give him a chance. But a lot of people were just like, nope, this isn't the right fit. But what do you make of that? Why do you think certain managers and certain clubs just for some reason don't click? We see it with Russell Martin at Rangers.
I was literally just going to say, I mean, look at that.
And Postecoglou at Forest doesn't look like a right fit either.
No, I mean that's a can to open. I mean, he said there's so much more to being a manager than just putting a team out on a pitch, right? And a huge part of it now for people is how they interact with the fans, the club, how they work in the system that is the business of the club. Is it technical directors and sporting directors in there, as well as chief executives, as well as owners? What are the actual jobs you're doing? What's the setup like? I mean, for him, I remember when he said it, he was just like, look, the size of opportunity was the thing that just got me, because again, that club is iconic. So, it was a question. It was never a question of do I want it? It was a question of I back myself and I'm going to take that on. And it's hard. And again, I'll probably get some pelters here, but it's like fans have made their mind up about you, and they're doing a Noni Madueke type thing, before you've even joined and stuff. That he's a human, he's a person. It's a hard thing to work on. That's going to be in the back of your mind, and it doesn't help. And ultimately, surely all of us who support clubs, we want everyone who's involved with our club to succeed, whether we think they're right or not. We want them to succeed, because if they succeed, we're collectively happy. So it's always it's a fine one. It's a fine one to balance, isn't it? With him, I remember he said he came in at, look at the time he came in. I mean, it was December, right? December's a horrible period of any season anyway. To
He
then
had a
have to
bad
go in,
first game as well.
bad first
Coventry
game,
at home.
bad
Not a
first
great
game. That you're playing however many days over that period of time. You've got no chance to get familiar with the squad. You've got no chance to really probably build a bit of a rapport with a fan base who's already made their mind up to some extent about you how you're going to do. And so the circumstances are a huge part of it. Timing is a huge part of fit. When someone comes in, what you're able to do with the team. But I would look at that and go, I think it's really interesting because it's the value of iteration. You guys found out a lot from that. It wasn't a mistake necessarily. It was a part of your process to get to where you are today because you learned what you didn't need. And the bigger crime in a situation like that is to do it again. So if the ownership got that wrong, fine, we can deal with that. If they'd then gone and done something similar, right, and brought in a similar type of person that didn't necessarily change the dynamics that Michael obviously had in the club, then that's on them. But no, they've actually brought in now a level of success and stability off the back of a negative experience for the club to go and succeed and achieve. And I'm sure, and I know Michael learned a lot from it as well. And I think that was his point. He wouldn't change anything. He wouldn't not do it, even though it didn't work, because it's an amazing place. And to anyone that gets a chance, I'm sure it's a privilege to manage that team for however brief a time it is. Obviously, you always want it to go well, but if it doesn't, it doesn't. And it's football, right? And as we know, these things happen all the time, and managers come and go, and that will forever happen. But he's had he's had some tough clubs to manage, big clubs. When you're looking at the fan bases and all of that, really successful at QPR at the beginning, and then obviously is highlighted then the way that he left was a major issue for many of the fans. Rangers is obviously again a massive job and a hard one to turn down for any manager, I'm sure, particularly one that's already had the ties up there. The main reason I think was because him and Steven Gerrard obviously built such good relationships with so many people in there. His family are in Scotland, so that played a part to it as well. And human factors in this side of football play a way bigger role than I think us fans actually ever really consider. We do, whether it's the players or the managers, right? They are still people. And that that can be a hard thing for them to overcome sometimes beyond anything else. Location's massive. I see that with loads of ones I speak to, where they're living, how they're feeling, is their family with them, and small things like this, if there's just a few of those small things that build up and then there's a bit of negativity around it, it can create quite a challenging environment to operate in. And unfortunately for him, it didn't work out. But as I say, what you guys have built off the back of it and what you learned from that has propelled you to the Premier League. Not saying it was all that, but it
helps.
It helps.
What not to do.
Yeah.
What do you make though of? Do you think clubs should listen to fans on things like that? Because this is something where when the news was breaking, the fan base was quite volatile in, we don't think this guy is right. Do you think football clubs should listen to the fans, or do you think the football clubs for this sort of thing go, you don't know anything about Michael? I mean, we don't know Michael Beale personally. We don't know what sort of a coach he is. Do you think the football club should just be like, no, we think that this is the right decision? Where do you sit on that debate is, right, if we hire Michael Beale, because the conversations at Sunderland would have happened where they would have went, the fan base are not happy really about this, but we trust our process. But at what point does a football club have to decide, you know what, we need to listen to that noise and make that decision because this isn't going to work if they're not bought in?
It's my Jim Ratcliffe piece, isn't it? Again, it's like if it becomes untenable and the stadium turns and the anger goes to the board, which often it does if things get really bad, and that side of it, then it's hard to ignore it. However, it's a question we ask all the time to owners and CEOs. Do you make decisions based on fan sentiment, and how do you find that balance? Fans, I'll say it again, fans are everything in football. These clubs are fans, but fans also have to realize sometimes that they need to let the people in the positions in their club make some of the decisions, because there may be information that they don't know. that is making something happen. Again, they may not like it, but are you in position of all the facts? Do you actually have the knowledge behind that decision? No. So is there better communication again to mitigate these situations when they're happening? 100%. If you've identified a challenge that you think a fan is not going to like, and it's a decision you're going to make, the top thing you need to be doing is making that line of communication with the fans overactive, right? Really, really open. And if the fans still don't like it, then at that point you go, look, guys, I'm sorry, but I'm making this decision. I'm in this position, and you're going to have to like it. But that really does come down to the executive or the owner, their willingness to communicate. But fans, of course, we want fans to have a voice. You want fans to have involvement in their club. You want to act. It's what this is all about. It's about passion. But I certainly don't think you can ever let fans fully govern a club, and I certainly don't think you could ever let the executives fully run it without taking that into account. So I feel like I've said balance loads and like finding the middle ground. It's a combination of the two. You imagine the chaos of letting fans run most clubs. I mean, even just the opinions. I'm sure you're on a concourse. One person loved one, another likes another. Another thinks it was a great first half, and others been moaning about something. I mean, you never get anything done.
Yeah, that is true. If I'm just going to finish this off now, because you've given us very generous with your time, 56 minutes to record. What do you think the state of football is going to be in the next sort of 10 years? Do you think it's going to get healthier and healthier? Because right now, I mean, I went to Carlisle against Hartlepool United last week, a National League game. There was 8,000 people there. Hartlepool had a full away end. It was a midweek game. And I sat there and I thought, you know what, football, even though there's a lot of issues and we talk about finances, football right now has never been more popular. The fact that we can sit in the 5th tier in a game feel this important is bonkers. We've got the health of the pyramid. But where do you think football's going to be in the next decade?
It's a massive question, isn't it? Are you talking about global football? Are we talking about the whole leagues here? Are we talking about
where do you think English football will be?
English football is amazing. You just highlight, it's literally like it's the best thing in, and obviously we would say it because we sit amongst it, but it is one of the best things in world football. It's one of the best things in world sport, and that is as you've just highlighted, it feeds the rest of the conversations we have of why it's so important to protect them to an extent, to make sure that things don't happen. Because when you have thousands of fans turning out in the 5th tier to watch these games, there's literally nothing better. And it's really important, because we do, there's so much negativity always around stuff, isn't there? And it is really important to remember those moments and look at it and go, yeah, do you know what? Like, this is really good still. I love it. This is my, and it is so for so many of us, right? It's our weekend. It's our midweek night sometimes. It plays a massive, massive role in our life. And generally we, football does a great job of doing what it is, which is an entertainment product that people care deeply about. But it's a community. It forges relationships. It's integral to how so many people live. Never lose that. So if you're never losing that, how are you building and developing it? The game has those challenges. Media, is going to be a major issue for them, and media rights, reliance on, particularly, the higher up the leagues you go, where you look at the portions of revenue that are generated through things like the Premier League deal. I mean, unless there's a lot of future proofing that needs to go on, because those deals, eventually they'll run out of games that they can sell on top of a package to increase the value, but it'll become more fragmented. There'll be many more distributors probably. Does it go social first, as you've seen some of the things like the Bundesliga doing with Mark Goldbridge and Stan broadcasting on YouTube, going where your fans are. Obviously that's a different type of model and very different to the one they have with Sky. Do they go D2C products? They have like the Netflix big, what France have had to do because they couldn't sell their rights. To me right now, I'm sure it cost me like 600-700 quid on all the subscriptions if I want to watch all the games at the moment. That's mad. Is there 120 quid one that is like your Netflix subscription, where you package it all up in there and you own the broadcast and the distribution, and the subscription fee, like a Disney or similar, runs very effectively, probably, and then at least you own that money. You're not relying on other people to pay you crazy fees for it. So I think that's a big challenge. But most importantly for the whole football, it's great. The regulator will be interesting. really interesting to see what they do. As I said, I think the lower league clubs will get more money from the Prem, but it will come with a set of rules and regulations and what you're allowed to do and spend that on. Hopefully that helps a lot some of the clubs as well, because it forces them to also invest in some of the things you were talking about earlier, like infrastructure. If you can't invest it all in the squad, then hey, we've still got 30% to put into some other projects. That could be really good. But you'd always want to be positive with it, right? You always want to look at it and go, this is such a great thing that we're lucky to have in this country, and it plays an amazing part of our kind of culture, in our culture. That doesn't change. That won't change, and the models around it may. But the thing again said it loads, but everyone just always has to remember, and if they remember this, I think it's okay. It's just fans first. You cannot forget the importance of the people that come and fill that stadium and that turn that TV on to watch you. And it sounds so obvious, but more and more people sometimes do that, and I don't think it's too hard to include the fans. As I said, good communications isn't actually that hard. You just got to recognize that people want that feeling of connection, and their communication with ownership groups and the clubs and the players and the managers, etc., is now a part of that in modern day sport. Buy into it, get involved in it, and you see the rewards.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I certainly think it's very interesting what has happened in La Liga and Serie A, where they're playing games abroad, and hopefully that never happens in the Premier League.
I don't want to do a Jim Ratcliffe again and say no, never happened, and then suddenly
I don't know who the teams would be. I could see Newcastle doing it for Saudi does that Riyadh season where they.
Of course you could see Newcastle doing it. Yeah. I don't. Well, yeah. I mean, it would be massive, right? So, and also the Premier League doesn't need the others need to do it. The Premier League right now, because they're playing a different financial game.
Yeah, and we could talk about why that is, but we'll not, because we'll be here forever. But I think if that happened and Sunderland announced they were playing Manchester United in Saudi Arabia, that would be enough to say. I have never protested, but that would be enough for me to go outside with my picket and be like, nope, not having this. I also don't get why people want to watch it, though, because if I follow the Atlanta teams because I had a year in Atlanta when I was a student. So if I want to watch the Atlanta Braves play baseball, I want to watch them play in their stadium. I don't want to watch them play at West Ham's ground.
No, I completely agree.
It's weird.
Well, bring it to people. Well, bring them to the Premier League. bring them to games. It's
a Liverpool fan wants to watch Liverpool Anfield.
Yeah. You lose again, don't you? You lose that thing that makes our sport so great, which is that feeling and fandom and culture and everything that comes into a game when you go into Anfield or Stadium of Light or any of the teams where, should we say, the fan environment makes at least half of the viewing product. Unlike our one at Chelsea, obviously,
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Charlie, for joining. Check out his podcast, The Business of Sport. As I say, it's if you enjoy listening to what's happening in the sporting world. I mean, I certainly do, but I think I'm a bit of a football nerd. I imagine most of your listeners are nerds.
I hope so. Yeah. It's a good place to be a nerd. But no, look, thank you. I've really enjoyed it. It's really fun to chat without the pressures of asking too many questions.
You're on the other side.
I know. Lovely. But no, it's really cool and love what you're doing with this, and I hope the fans don't take too much issue with any of the Sunderland stuff.
No, I'm sure they'll be fine. You might get a few comments about Charlie Methven and saying he doesn't know what he's talking about, but I'm sure
it's part of it. Again, it's opinion, right? We love opinion.
Exactly. So thanks everyone for watching, though, and we'll catch you for more videos and interviews very, very soon.